Good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming out. Those of us here last night braved the rain, and we had one visitor here, which was quite encouraging. We have John here tonight, who's also visiting. But also thanks to everybody who's come from far and near to be with us tonight. We had an excellent lesson from John last night. Looking forward to the next lesson tonight. And the theme is God relevant? And John touched on God's relevance in creation last night. That indeed, if God is not relevant in creation, we would not be here. So it's just as well that when we think about our next breath, it's because God is relevant. And without that relevance, you have no guarantee you have a next breath to take. There's a passage of scripture I'd like to read just very briefly. It kind of sums up what John was saying last night. It says, "In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, He has spoken to us by His Son, whom He appointed heir of all things, and through whom He also made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of His being, sustaining all things by His powerful word." That's so profound that it says here that God sustains everything by His mighty power and by all the laws that John spoke about last night as well. That's how God sustains His universe. So without God, we just go out of existence in a second. So John was speaking about that last night, how relevant God is. So I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say tonight as well. So I think without further ado, we'll just ask John to come up. But just before he does, please switch off all your tech, just in case your mobile phone is going to go off. All right? Thanks.
I think I just switched on my tech. That's okay. I think that'll work very nicely. Let's make sure that this tech's on too, working. It's good to see everyone tonight. Although I feel a bit lopsided, but it works out okay. So I'm a little more over here than over here, Ken. So it's not you. So we'll be okay. Yeah, absolutely. So, is God relevant? Last night, looked at some things from science, which we're going to do tonight as well. We noticed that we live in an age where most people think that science is going to provide all the answers. In fact, all the ones we need. It's strange. People even think doctors do that. Yeah. Going to a doctor, you expect to get a pill that's going to take care of whatever ails you. That too. But strangely, sometimes what we have, a pill won't deal with. And sometimes we demand a doctor, why don't you give me a pill? But we think science is going to answer all the questions. We looked last night at how science does not have an answer to how everything came about. If there's no God, and we looked at this we looked at it primarily from science. If there's no God, there's no mechanism for nothing to become something. If there's no natural means this can happen, the only alternative is supernatural. And God's relevant when we discuss the beginning of everything. And we spent this little bit of time at the end last night talking about the conditions you need on a planet to have life. And we saw that again, there's no natural mechanism to provide the conditions for life. The odds are just too small. I want to continue trying on that same vein, but taking it maybe another step further. By looking at human life and how God's existence is important for that as well. When we go to science, the question is, how did life begin? And what we are told, at least one of the explanations we get from science, is that life generated spontaneously from non-living chemicals. That somehow they had all these bits and pieces about science. Science, to be true science, has to be repeatable. If you can't repeat it, then you can't prove anything. It's got to be repeatable. You know, scientists have been trying to repeat that for between 60 and 70 years, maybe over 100 years. They've been trying to figure out how you can get life from non-life. And what they've been doing is taking various chemicals and gases and mixing them together to simulate Earth's early atmosphere. Now, you might know that we don't know what Earth's early atmosphere was, but you make presumptions. And so they're trying to figure out how this would work. Then they would add an electrical spark. I gotta have something to start life, electrical spark. And the result, no life. They've never been able to get life to start. Richard Milner, in one of my favorite books actually, The Encyclopedia of Evolution. It actually tells you what's wrong with evolutionary theory, amongst other things. It's been a really nice resource. My son used to use that when he's in biology class in high school. When they're teaching him one thing, this is how it happened. He says, don't you know scientists just proved that 50 years ago? Prove it. So you bring him a book in. And this is written by evolutionists. So, yeah. So it's a good book. In that book, Richard Milner says, unfortunately, no cell has yet crawled out of a test tube. And thousands of similar experiments have produced goopy organic tars, but no recognizable life. Decades of persistent failure to create life by the spark of the soup method have caused some researchers to seek other approaches to the great enigma. I don't know about you, but to me, that sounds more like Frankenstein and his experiments and adding the electricity and whatnot to bring the monster to life. And we know that's fiction. We know that doesn't work. Miller, in his article, went on to say that even the most promising, technically sophisticated attempts to demonstrate the origin of life from non-living chemicals are still guesses and gropes in the dark. For almost a century, many scientists have thought that some version of the spark in the soup theory must be true. Repetition of this idea as fact without sufficient evidence has done a disservice to new generations by capping their curiosity about a profound and open question. Encyclopedia of Evolution, written by evolutionists, to tell you about evolution, says it's not happened, and it's just taught as fact that it did. He says it's doing a disservice to science. Well, it's doing a disservice to lots of things as well. One thing you've got to realize is even the most primitive cell is extremely complex. See, it's not just a matter of getting life. There are so many systems within a cell with incredible complexity. We looked at the universe last night. The cell has a universe within it. A universe that we can't see. But it's there. You get nice big electron microscopes. And it's amazing what you see in the cell. Think about just a single cell organism. It couldn't have just evolved. It has so many different parts. Naturally, there's no way that something of the complexity of just one cell could just happen. In fact, if you just take that little, it looks like a tail, doesn't it? It's called a flagellum. I've seen the microscope blown up, and they get a moving, nothing takes off. That's why it propels itself. But just taking the flagellum alone, there's complexity in the flagellum that we would see in an outboard boat motor. It is so complex. It was the study of the flagellum that caused Michael Behe, who was a biochemist, to end up writing this book. And this book is called Darwin's Black Box. And he abandoned Darwinism in favor of designer because of the flagellum. because of his studies of the flagellum. He said in his book, he says, science's mastery of nature has led many people to presume that it can, indeed must, also explain the origin of nature and life. Darwin's proposal that life can be explained by natural selection acting on variation has been overwhelmingly accepted in educated circles for more than a century. There are compelling reasons based on the structure of systems themselves to think a Darwinian explanation for the mechanisms of life will forever prove elusive. He says it just can't happen the way that Darwin explained it. And by the way, perhaps Charles Darwin could be excused in thinking that cellular life is so primitive, so basic, because they didn't have the microscopes. They didn't have the technology we have where we can see all of that. But because of what we know about the cell, it's no longer excusable to keep throwing this up. Because we know it just can't happen. Francis Crick wrote, an honest man, armed with all the knowledge available to us now, could only state that in some sense, the origin of life appears at the moment to be almost a miracle. So many of the conditions which have had to have been satisfied to get it going. Crick received the Nobel Prize, I mentioned him last night. Nobel Prize for his discovery of DNA. Maybe we didn't mention him last night. Maybe it's just tonight. I've been working on this for days, and I can't remember who I mentioned last night. Bill Crick, he's the guy that discovered DNA, got the Nobel Prize. British molecular biologist, biophysicist, and neuroscientist. He was not a believer in God. He preferred scientific search for answers over religious belief. That's what he said about himself. He referred to himself as a humanist. So he doesn't believe in God. Oh, this is quoted in a book by Gary Bates called Alien Intrusion. And Gary Bates is somebody who believes in creation. He was once a convinced evolutionist. But again, the evidence that he saw, or the evidence he didn't see, caused him to change his mind. Fred Hoyle, along with Chandra, however you pronounce the last name there, said, once we see, however, that the probability of life originating at random is so utterly minuscule as to make the random concept absurd, it becomes sensible to think that the favorable properties of physics on which life depends are in every respect deliberate. It is therefore almost inevitable that our own measure of intelligence must reflect in a valid way the higher intelligences to our left, even to the extreme idealized limit of God. Sir Fred Hoyle didn't believe in God. He was professor of astronomy at Cambridge University. His partner there was a professor of astronomy and applied mathematics at University College Cardiff. Hoyle didn't believe in God. He didn't believe that God did it. We'll explain in a minute how he did believe. But he proposed that there had to be a higher intelligence involved. And there's a number of scientists that, although they see the evidence points to a higher intelligence, they reject the idea of God. Because they don't like the idea of God. And instead, they opt for what's called, don't you love the word, panspermia. Panspermia. What this means is that life was designed and created by aliens who brought it to the earth. Now, you laugh at that. I chuckle too, by the way. But these are serious scientists who believe this. That's what this illustration is. That's the little thing from space coming to Earth that had the life on it. So it's from a Greek word that means all seed. But some scientists who embrace this view have included Sir Fred Hoyle. He wrote a book, something Life from Outer Space or something like that. And he believed that's what had happened. Sir Francis Crick, discoverer of DNA, also believed that. And what is interesting, Richard Dawkins has even mentioned this in the film called Expelled. I've not found him writing on it yet. If you've seen the film Expelled, Ben Stein interviewing Richard Dawkins, well worth seeing, by the way. But in it, he says, this is Dawkins speaking, nobody knows how it got started, speaking about life. Nobody knows how it got started. We know the kind of event it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life. It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule. It could come about the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved probably by some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they somehow seeded onto this planet. That is a possibility, and an intriguing possibility. When you can watch the film, you can hear him say that. I'm thinking, Dawkins said that? But yeah, he did. Interesting. See, the problem with that is it doesn't really answer the question, does it? Where did that life come from? All it's doing is shoving it back one more step. Where did that life come from? In his book, Alien Intrusion, Gary Bates says, the concept of panspermia merely shifts the problem of life's origin further into outer space where it cannot be tested. And did the aliens evolve, or were they created? If they were created by other aliens, who created those, and so on. Where does it end? Or more importantly, where did it begin? And I think Gary Bates does have a good point. Is God relevant? Is God relevant when we talk about something that's non-living becoming something that's living? See, there's no natural mechanism for that to happen. We can't figure out how that could happen. The complexity even of a single cell shows that there is design. Now, if there's no evidence that life just spontaneously came to being, it isn't good enough just to say, well, it must have happened because we have life. No, that's not good science. We know life does not come from something that's not living. A better explanation is that there was a designer to give us such a complex design, even on a molecular level. And get a chance sometime, look at cells and cellular life. It's incredible what goes on in our bodies that we're not even aware of. There's so much going on. It's a universe all about itself. But how do we get human life? How did we get here? And evolution has an explanation as well. And it all starts with something that Darwin referred to as natural selection. And natural selection has several sort of odds and ends to it. One of them is adaptation to their surroundings. And this is where Darwin started. He was a member on the Galapagos. The story is that he was observing various types of finches. The reality was he was mesmerized by the giant tortoises. He collected the finches, he studied them later, but he was actually the tortoises he quite liked. But he decided when he studied the finches that they all came from one ancestor who had come from South America. The offspring of the original finch, he surmised, developed various specific characteristics to adapt to varying environments on the varying islands. And this resulted in an extremely different type of finches. And he said, if finches can do this, if this can happen within a species, that's referred to technically as microevolution, why should not this be the same for how there ended up being a variety of plant and animal life? That they've evolved into various forms. That's called macroevolution. But the problem is, what mechanism would allow for a species to change into something totally different? Now, one thing we know about genetic code is that genetic code allows for variation within a species. And that's not a problem. That's good science. In fact, our farmers have been using that for years. I grew up, my grandparents were farmers. And yeah, you're breeding cattle, you breed for certain characteristics. We know how to do that. It's been going on for years. But that's not really what's being talked about there. The idea of natural selection is selecting those traits and forming a new type of organism. So, how could that happen? How could we get something totally new? Well, the suggestion was, well, what about genetic mutations? And by the way, you hear a lot about genetic mutations as forming things. Because the thing is, to get a totally new species, we need new traits introduced. And the idea is if enough mutations occurred for long enough, then you've got a new organism. There's a problem with that scenario. And the problem is very simply this. Mutations aren't a gain of information. Mutations are a loss of information. And if you look at any mutation, because we have mutations that go about today, look at a mutation, it's a loss of information. We've not gained anything. So it's actually a degeneration, not evolving into something higher. Stephen Jay Gould said that the essence of Darwinism lies in a single phrase: natural selection is the creative force of evolutionary change. No one denies that selection will play a negative role in eliminating the unfit. Darwinian theories requires that it create the fit as well. Stephen Jay Gould, by the way, died in 2002. He was an American paleontologist, an evolutionary biologist, historian of science, taught at Harvard, worked at the American Museum of Natural History. He's an evolutionist. He's saying, no, Darwin, it can't work. What Darwin says about that just simply cannot work. By the way, Gould was raised in a secular Jewish home. Didn't formally practice any religion growing up, preferred to be called an agnostic. And along with Niles Eldridge, he came up with the idea of how he thought evolution would work. And it's punctuated equilibrium. Basically, the fossil record doesn't support Darwin. We'll talk about this briefly in a second. But, so therefore, because what we're seeing is fully formed things. We don't see gradual fossil, we see fully formed. So that's what he said, is that it happened very, very fast, and that the fossil record didn't report it. But he was an evolutionist. So, genetic mutations really don't work as well. But the other thing you've got to have for evolution to work is time. In fact, Darwin says, anyone who does not admit how incomprehensibly vast have been the past periods of time may at once close this volume. He's referring to, of course, his volume that he was writing called Origin of Species. I think that's what we call it. Title's actually a bit longer than that. But that's what he said. You got to have lots of time. And that concept of time is interesting. Monty White wrote, given enough to, basically what's saying is, given enough time, anything will and can, even does happen. It seems as if the enormous period of time involved deadens our reasoning so that we believe the unbelievable. Monty White, I actually know Monty White, I've met him several times. He's a believer in God as well as being a scientist. And he wrote this book here, he's written, I think, one other book as well. But time. See, no matter how much time you give it, one thing you've got to have that happen, you've got to have happen. At some point, non-humans had to give birth to humans. Now, you can make that as much time as you want, but at some point along that timeline, something non-human had to produce a human. A non-human, in some way, had to become a human. Either gave birth, I don't think this would ever happen, it was non-human one step, and the next step it was human. It's something that had to have happened, had to have been non-human to human. And by the way, once isn't enough either. Once won't work. It had to be twice, didn't it? Because you need a male and you need a female, contrary to what we're taught today. You need a male and a female. In fact, not only did it have to happen twice, it had to happen twice in the same place, at the same time. Because it's no good for one to evolve here, one to evolve 1,000 miles away, and there's no way they ever meet each other. That just doesn't work. That's not going to happen. And at the same time, does it happen? Does it work that one evolves and then one evolves 100 or 200 years later when the first one's already dead? No, it had to happen twice at the same time. Think about all that. See, no matter how much time you give it, that's just not going to happen naturally. Now, Darwin thought that the fossil record would prove it. Now, at the time he wrote Order of Species, 1859, I guess they found some fossils, but they're just in the process of finding fossils. That's a big Victorian thing that was taking place. And of course, we're still doing it today, aren't we? In fact, did you notice they found some really good stuff, announced really good stuff in the last couple of weeks? They're finding now fossils of dinosaurs, where it's not just bones, it's the whole thing. Go online and look it up. You can see the pictures. Fascinating stuff. My son, who looks out for the stuff, he lives in Memphis, Tennessee. But he sent me a text this morning. He does this when he sees something. And it was a Pictish stone, up in the Highlands someplace. And it had been used as a grave marker in the late 1700s. And they turned it over. They finally excavated it, turned it over. And it's Pictish. And it's got some beasts, they're calling it, on it. Guess what they look like? Yeah. Pictish drawing of like dinosaurs. So, good stuff, good stuff. In Scotland, no less. But one more thing to say. Charles Darwin said, the chief objection which might be justly urged against the views maintained in this volume, one, namely, the distinctiveness of specific forms that are not being blended together by innumerable transitional links, is a very obvious difficulty. The number of intermediate varieties which have formerly existed on the earth must be truly enormous. Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain. And this perhaps is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory. The explanation lies, as I believe, in the extreme imperfection of the geological record. Now, he said, we just haven't found enough. I'll give him that. It's at that point. But as David Robb wrote, David Robb, I emphasize again, is an evolutionist, Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. And he says, well, when he wrote this, we're now about 120 years after Darwin, and we're a lot further than that. And the knowledge of the fossil record has been greatly expanded. We now have 250,000 fossil species, but the situation hasn't changed much. The record of evolution is still surprisingly jerky, and ironically, we have even fewer examples of evolutionary transition than we had in Darwin's time. You might be thinking, how do we have fewer? Well, very simply, the fact that the ones that Darwin was pointing out and discovered aren't. And the ones that even then were pointed out have been discovered there aren't either. So he says, by this I mean that some of the classic cases of Darwinian change in the fossil record, such as the evolution of the horse in North America, have had to be discarded or modified as a result of more detailed information. What appeared to be a nice, simple progression with relatively few data were available now appears to be much more complex and much less gradualistic. That's why Stephen Jay Gould and Niles Eldridge came up with their revision, because the fossils did not support Darwin's theory. And, of course, the other problem is, what do we do with design? What do we do with design? See, time doesn't help the evolutionary theory. Gradual changes won't work, because everything has to work the first time. Has to work right the first time. Doesn't do good for something to be on the way to working. It's got to work, or otherwise you've got problems within that organism. Genetic mutations don't work because they're a loss of information. They're not an addition of new information. And natural selection doesn't create anything new, but it's simply a variety found in the genetic code. The problem, I think one of the problems Darwin had today, if you go down to, at least it used to be, you go down to the Museum of Natural History in London, they keep changing their exhibits, but when I was there last time, one of their exhibits was, Darwin didn't know about genetics. You're absolutely right. He did not know about genetics. And as a result, a lot of things that he proposed, we know just doesn't work. And that's one of the problems. We know about genetics. And now we know about DNA. We've cracked the DNA code as well. What do we do with design? Are there systems or structures in the human body that define evolution? I'll mention one. There's more than one. 1,000 different. It's fine. We all have one. In fact, most of us have two. So it works better when you have two. You have stereo vision that way. The good old eye. The eye. The eye is made up, I'm told, of 7 layers. I think they're fascinating. We've got the cornea, the protective coverings, made up of 7 layers, actually. And you've got the lens, which is instant focusing. Except mine doesn't focus quite right because my glasses are sitting down there, because if I have my glasses on, you see, I can't read what's here. And so therefore you all will work. But it's okay. So it all works out pretty well. But we've got a lens. It's a great lens. We've got a vitreous. Vitreous is a hydraulic system of the eye. Keeps the eye in the proper shape. Keeps everything within the eye in place. But the pressure has to be perfect. Oh, too much pressure. I think it's called glaucoma, is it not? And we've got those problems. We've got a retina, which contains rods and cones. What they do is react to light that allows us to see. We've got what's called a fovea, which part sends the clear signal to the brain, but it has to be in a precise place in order for that to happen. And then, of course, we've got an optic nerve, and it's really the part that gathers the signals from all the parts of the eye and sends it to the brain. And hopefully, you also have the brain. And the brain takes what they say is an upside-down signal, turns it around so that we see right side up. I've thought about that. Maybe we are seeing upside down. Will we know the difference? I'm not sure. But anyway, that's what it does. It turns around so we can see right side up. The question is, these 7 things, could they have just developed, could it just happen by natural processes? If just one of those parts don't work, we are blind. They all have to work. Obviously, I choose the eye for one particular reason, and that's because of what Charles Darwin wrote about the eye. He said, to suppose that the eye, with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for emitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection, seems, I freely confess, absurd to the highest degree. Darwin himself says, could it happen? So I can't figure out how in the world something like that could happen. See, the only explanation for the eye was that it was designed to work perfectly from the start. That's the way it was made. And by the way, our eyes are unique from other animals' eyes, because a lot of them don't have some of the parts that we have. Therefore, they don't have the clear vision that we have. At least, well, my glasses don't have that clear vision, but they don't have our clear vision. It's hard for someone who believes in Darwin's theory of evolution to deal with that. So, here's what Richard Dawkins had to say about the eye. He said, the evolution of the vertebrate eye must have been progressive. Ancient ancestors had a very simple eye, containing only features good for seeing. Notice this next bit. We don't need evidence for this. It has to be true, because the alternative, an initially complex eye, well endowed with features good for seeing, pitches us right back to the sheer cliff of improbability. Without stirring from our armchair, we can see it must be so. Yeah, really. We don't need evidence. And why? Because it doesn't fit in with evolutionary belief. Even Charles Darwin admitted that natural selection cannot account for the human eye. And by the way, even the very simple eye of what is supposed to be the simplest creatures way back in supposedly early time turns out to be some of the most complex eyes that we know. Not simple at all. Speaking in particular, I forgot to put his name down, but I just blanked, because it does that. This is a trilobite. I took this picture at the University of, or the Texas Memorial Museum in Austin, Texas. But I like this one. Look at those things hanging up. Very nice specimen. I meant to bring two of mine as well. I forgot to bring them. But if you do, some of them are so well preserved that I can't afford the ones that are so well preserved you can see the eye. But they cost a bundle. But this is what a chemist that I met, Professor Pete, and he sent me his pictures. That is the eye of a trilobite. Very not simple. It's a very complex eye. But according to evolution, this is one of the earliest creatures that there was. Very complex eyes. You see, what Dawkins is saying doesn't match the evidence that we have. William Paley, who lived back in the 1700s, said in his Natural Theology, and it's in, this book is an 1851 edition. So you want to look through it. I've got another copy of Natural Theology sitting over there from the 1900s as well. But Paley said, were there no example in the world of contrivance, world design, except the eye, it would be alone sufficient to support the conclusion which we draw from it as to the necessity of an intelligent creator. And he wrote that back in the 1700s. I found that fascinating. And he's got this whole chapter or so on the eye. And then he says, well, that's not enough. Here's the ear. And he talks about the ear. Fascinating that they had all this knowledge back then. Well, he was an English clergyman. He served for quite a bit of time. He was one of the deacons at the cathedral in Carlisle. And there's a plaque to him in the Carlisle Cathedral, which you can see today. You know, what do you do with all this evidence? There's design. What do you do with it? Well, let me tell you about one atheist and what he did. This is Anthony Flew, lived from 1923 down to 2010. He was born in London, received his first class degree at Oxford, St. John's College. He was an English philosopher. He taught at universities of Oxford, Aberdeen, Keele, Reading, York University, and Toronto. I don't think he did it all at the same time, but those are the ones that he was involved with. He was an extremely strong advocate of atheism. He loved to debate people who believed in God and who God could take care of them. He loved debating on atheism. He said that he concluded at the age of 15 that there was no God. He also criticized the idea of life after death. And he died on the 8th of April 2010 in Reading. Interesting thing about Professor Flew. In 1976, he debated a man named Thomas B. Ward. Some of us may either known him or known of him. I know his grandson. I'd say quite well, but not very well. He debated Thomas More on the existence of God. You can view this debate at wvbs.org, or you can look up on YouTube and find this debate. By most reckoning, Flew was unprepared for Tom More. And I would like to think that this debate at least got Anthony Flew thinking. Because in 2004, he changed his mind about there being a God. In 2007, we published a book. There is a God. And notice the subtitle there, How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Changed His Mind. Easy access to that book on Amazon. So yeah, and Anthony Flew. His belief in God would better resemble what we call deism. But he changed his mind that there was no God. I remember reading about this when it came out. The Associated Press, New York, said this: at age 81, after decades of insisting belief is a mistake, Anthony Flew has concluded that some sort of intelligence or first cause must have created the universe. A superintelligence is the only good explanation for the origin of life and the complexity of nature, Flew said in a telephone interview from England. Okay, what's the one thing that convinced him that there must be a God of some sort? The article in the Associated Press went on to say, the biologist's investigation of DNA has shown, by the almost unbelievable complexity of the arrangements which are needed to produce life, that intelligence must have been evolved, who says. In the new video, has science discovered God? Actually, I need to look for that video because I've not seen that one yet, but I would like to see it. Has science discovered God? See, there is design in humans, a design which could not happen by accident. A design that, when discovered, changed a lifelong, in his own words, notorious atheist into believing in God. And that's DNA. DNA was such a great discovery. Anthony Flew, in his book, in the conclusion of his book, page 155, says, science qua science. In case you look up qua means in the capacity of. Science in the capacity of science. It's a lot easier to use qua than say in the capacity of. Science qua science cannot furnish an argument for God's existence. But the three items of evidence we've considered in this volume, the laws of nature, life with its teleological organization, and the existence of the universe, can only be explained in the light of an intelligence that explains both its own existence and that of the world. Such a discovery of the divine does not come through experienced equations, but through an understanding of the structures they unveil and map. His research, his study, his seeing while other people were researching and studying, led him to believe that there is God. It's interesting that despite the lack of evidence, most people just assume that evolution's how we got here. It permeates just about everything. In fact, you won't hear many conversations in the media when evolution is not referenced in some form as proof or evidence of something. Most of you know, many of you know, my dad died last year. He had Alzheimer's at the end of his life. So did his mother. You know what I'm thinking? Not a good thought. So therefore, I've been doing a lot of research over this past year on Alzheimer's. I've done a lot of online seminars and things, and I've learned a whole lot, by the way. One thing I've learned is that Alzheimer's is preventable. It's not curable, but it is preventable. So you might want to research that. It's good. But interesting, when they start talking about Alzheimer's, they talk about nutrition, which is the key. Start talking about all that. They always go back and reference, we need to eat these things because of our evolutionary makeup. I'm thinking, really? Or is it because we're designed to need these nutrients? But almost every episode I hear, evolution is referenced somewhere. In nutrition of all things, evolution. And it's frequently stated that we've just evolved to need these things. I'm thinking, really? Why don't we evolve beyond it? But anyway, yeah. So, is God relevant? Is God relevant when we discuss how life came to be? Is God relevant when we discuss the design that we find in the making of life? Remember the advice, we mentioned this last night, the advice that Richard Dawkins gave his 10-year-old daughter. It's in the back, last chapter of his book, A Devil's Chaplain. He said, next time somebody tells you something that sounds important, think to yourself, is this the kind of thing people probably know because of evidence? And next time somebody tells you that something's true, why not say to them, what kind of evidence is there for that? They don't give you a good answer. hope they'll think carefully before they believe a word we say. And who was it that said you don't need evidence? Interesting. His daughter does. So, the thing is, the evidence tells us that life as we know it could not have just happened. We need a designer. We need a designer. And not only is God relevant, God's the only answer to how life came to be with the complexity that we find. He is the answer that we have. You know, there's nothing really in science that contradicts this statement from Genesis. God created humankind in his own image. The image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. You see, science points to a designer, to a creator. The Bible tells us what he did. And the Bible also tells us how he wants us to live. Look at the psalmist, Psalm 8. He wrote, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you set in place, what is mankind that you're mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them. You made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor. Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth." That's actually quite a statement. When you consider the vastness of the universe, in fact, the vastness of the universe and the vastness of the microscopic universe, when you consider the vastness, yet God cares for us. Isn't that great? No wonder David ended there with, "Oh Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth." You know, if there's no God, why are we here? That's a question science can't answer. Science is not equipped to answer that. Science observes what's here. And even atheists don't have an adequate answer. A chap named Sam Harris was speaking at a global atheist convention in 2012. I didn't know atheists had conventions, but apparently they do. Global Atheist Convention. And he said two things. He said, the good news of atheism is nothing. I'm thinking, that's good news. Okay. And then went on to say, we are all in the business of seeking fulfillment as humans. We're all in the business of seeking fulfillment. What people really need to find the ultimate fulfillment in life is to meditate. Interesting. By the way, I'm not against meditation. Search how many times meditation is mentioned in Scripture, especially by the Psalms. But, you know, just meditating is not going to bring people the ultimate fulfillment. It's good for health, I'm told, and prayer is a good form of meditation, I'm told, as well. But not for the ultimate fulfillment, unless we have one other aspect to our meditation. That's what David advocates. God. If we want the ultimate fulfillment, we've got to put God into the equation. See, atheism really offers nothing. God offers hope. Even those who struggle to believe in God can see this. In his book, In God We Dealt, by the broadcaster John Humphreys, he wrote the end of it. He says, one choice is to accept the conclusion reached by Jean-Paul Sartre in The Age of Reason. There is no purpose to existence, only nothingness. That is a perfectly rational conclusion. If, like me, you cannot accept that we exist in order to worship God, but however much you may appeal to our reason, Sartre's conclusion is too bleak for me. Now, by the way, the subtitle of this book we mentioned this last night, Confessions of a Failed Atheist. He struggles. I sympathize with John Humphreys. He does struggle. I think part of the struggle is he's been told some things that probably aren't totally right. Do we exist just to worship God? Or is it more than that? You know, worship is part of our lives as Christians. But you know, our life as a Christian is much more than just worship. That's a part of it. I think it's sad that John Humphrey has never seen what real Christianity is. He doesn't seem to have seen what real Christianity is about. If God cares enough to provide such a beautiful place for humans to live. I think we can know He cares about us too. God wants more than for us to worship Him. He wants us to have a relationship with Him. That's why we're here. To have a relationship with God that goes on beyond this life. If you want to learn more about God and from people, there's a study course for you here. It's free, no obligation. We're all back there. There's some cards back there you can fill out. We'd be happy to send that to you. There's also some leaflets back there in the back of the table. Feel free to help yourself to those. They deal with some aspects of some things we talked about. They have some different details in them, but they may be of use. Just keep in our minds always, God's relevant. And the interesting thing is, science says it. Science tells us that there must be a God. There's got to be something that God will say.
Thank you, John. I'm going to stick my brain in the water now after a very in-depth lesson tonight. Really appreciate it. We thank you, John, for both these lessons. And John's going to be with us tomorrow at Hyvots Bank, which is in Gilbride Drive here in Edinburgh. So if you would like to come along to that and visit with us, then you're most welcome. John is going to have it.
What we'll be talking about is God relevant.
Is God relevant? Yeah.
Yes, so we're going to continue today.
Okay. So the theme is going to be continued. As John mentioned, there are leaflets at the back. We're going to take these, and there's information about our address, etc. What was in Scar, you can take that as well. The other thing is, there's tea and coffee available now, so if you want to stick around and have weather and have a cup of tea, that's great as well. But before we close, let's bow our heads and we'll open up the Lord in prayer. Our Lord in heaven, we give you thanks for tonight, that we can be comforted by your word, Father, knowing that you are a wonderful God and you are so relevant in every area of our lives, that you are relevant, Father, because you created the universe, and it manifests, Father, your wisdom and your great mighty power. We thank you, Father, that you are relevant, Father, because you gave us life. And we know that things don't come to life from the dead, but rather you are God of the living. And we pray that you will richly bless us as your children, as we bow the knee to you, Father, in our daily lives. And we pray that you will richly bless us as we honour your name, Father, and everything we do and say. And help us, Father, to deeply love, Father, our brothers and sisters in Christ and those that we meet in our daily lives. We pray that you will bless us now as we fellowship together.